The art of film is one that inspires emotions all across the board. Whether happiness, laughter, sadness, fear, or suspense, we just can't seem to get enough of these stories on the screen. However, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that the market for films which actively try to punish and infuriate their audience is rather niche. Yet that is exactly what Michael Haneke intends to do with his film, Funny Games. It's a 2007 shot-for-shot remake of the director's own foreign film from 10 years prior. And while there is debate around which one is better, it doesn't entirely matter as they're literally the same movie. It follows Anne, George, and Georgie Farber who go to stay at a vacation home. Things go awry when two seemingly unassuming young men by the name of Paul and Peter slowly infiltrate their home and proceed to torture the family throughout the night. Now, Haneke's no stranger to polarizing his audience, but that is never held more true than with Funny Games. I see a lot of people absolutely loathe this movie, and others walk away completely unsatisfied and confused. So if you happen to be one of those people, maybe I can help you understand what Haneke was going for. To put it simply, Funny Games is a meta-commentary on the horror genre, and in larger part, a critique on the way people consume violence in media. It functions as less of a traditional story and more as an exercise in toying with the kind of audience member who actively seeks out violence for the sake of entertainment. A good place to start would be perhaps the most uncomfortable scene in the entire film.
Now the kid is in the bag. Now let's see if mommy's titties sag.
This goes on for about 2 minutes, and we spend the near entirety of it held on Anne's face. The pace is agonizingly slow, and Naomi Watts' phenomenal performance makes the entire experience nothing short of grueling. Most notable of all, however, is the fact that we never actually see any nudity. Now, we all know this genre is no stranger to the naked body, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's often used for the sake of objectification. So, where a certain kind of moviegoer may be clamoring to see them titties, Haneke instead fills the entire screen with the emotional torment this character is currently experiencing, forcing us to see the reality of the situation.
What did I say? No jelly rolls. And now we can get dressed again. Thank you.
This also applies to most of the violence. Rarely seeing any, we instead watch the pained and tortured reactions of the characters experiencing it. Again, a lot of what happens here is not particularly new to horror movies, but what separates this one is its presentation. Whereas most films will manipulate these kinds of scenarios into something that can be considered entertaining or thrilling, Funny Games presents them with no manipulation. Never do we get a musical cue to lift the tension and remind us that this is just a movie. There isn't even a soundtrack outside of the opening and closing credits. Instead, we are forced to experience these horrible events in real time, right alongside the family. This is especially apparent during the 20-minute portion in which Paul and Peter are completely absent from the film, and the pace slows to a crawl. This shot here goes on for almost 10 minutes, and for about half of it we watch as Anne and George completely break down. This fucking scene is absolutely devastating to watch, and no matter how much you'll be begging Haneke to just cut away or play some music, he never does. The camera stays frozen while we bear witness to human suffering in its most unfiltered display. By only showing the consequences of violence, Haneke is forcing us to rethink the enjoyment we get from actually watching it. To put that in non-pretentious terms, it's as if he's saying, hey, you wanted to see these people suffer, right? Well, here you go. No take-back, sorry. Pile on a lack of any traditional comforts the average viewer may be accustomed to, and you've successfully got them questioning why they even wanted to watch this in the first place. Now, the same rings true for the story itself. Really, it's kind of a masterclass when it comes to fucking around with audience expectations. A good example would be the opening credits. We're lulled into a trance with some beautiful landscapes and calming classical music. But just as one may begin to drift off, perhaps not the film they were expecting. Multiple times, an opportunity of relief will be presented to our main characters, and then ripped away. For example, towards the beginning of the film, Haneke draws clear attention towards a knife being dropped in the Farber's boat, setting the expectation that it will come into play sometime later. And at the very end of the film, it does, only to be immediately made useless. Then there's the chunk without Paul and Peter. We spend an entire 20 minutes with these characters as they try to escape, so something has to come of it, right? Well, no, Paul and Peter just show right back up. Well, how about when little Georgie manages to escape? He makes it to another house, but the residents are dead. Okay, not too surprising, but he found a gun, but it's not loaded and Paul just takes him back to the house. But still, they're not actually gonna kill the kid, right? Oh. The way I see it, Hanukkah is calling out a contradiction within the audience. We came into this thing for the purpose of watching a helpless family be put in a horrific, uncompromising situation that would most likely end with them dead, yet we also expect the narrative to play out in a way that is most satisfying to our sensibilities. There will be 1 or 2 survivors, no kids will be killed. The villains will get their due, and in the end, I will go home feeling satisfied. Funny Games rips that false sense of security right out of our hands, teasing us with the possibility, but ultimately reminding us that we are not in control of how these events play out, nor how we get to experience them. In the same way that Paul and Peter have complete control over the Farbers, Hanukkah has complete control over the viewer and is free to drag them through the mud as much as he pleases. Now I'd like to shift gears a little bit and discuss the satirical elements of this film that I find to be pretty underappreciated by some people. Not only is most of the dialogue from Paul and Peter pretty comedic.
Can you believe that your darling little boy just tried to kill me with this? I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth. And nothing but the truth, right, Georgie?
But there's humor to be found in the complete absurdity of the entire situation. Our villains just kind of show up out of nowhere, and the entire ordeal is started because of some eggs. I'm not even kidding. Well, alright, it was clearly pre-planned, but nevertheless that is the scapegoat they use. And the level to which the Farbers are punished for this is completely ridiculous.
You slapped me in the face. Yeah, he started it.
It's a hilarious exaggeration of the often flimsy excuses many horror movies will use to put their characters in harm's way. Another example is perhaps my favorite scene in the film, and I'm just gonna let this one play out for a little bit.
At least we could keep this whole thing
Why are you doing
civilized.
this?
Tubby, why are we doing this? Go on, say it.
I don't know.
The captain would like to know why. Well,
It's difficult to talk about it.
don't be shy.
You know exactly how hard this is for me.
Jesus, what a drum. His father divorced his mother when he was this big. For another woman.
That's not true. He's lying. My mother got a divorce
Because she wanted her little teddy bear all to herself. Which is why he's gay and he's a criminal. Got it?
you're an asshole.
The truth is, he's white trash. He comes from a filthy, deprived family. 5 siblings, all of them on drugs. His father is an alcoholic. His mother, well, you can imagine. Truth is, he's fucking her. It's sad, but it's true.
The story is complete nonsense and doesn't even really answer the question. But then he changes it, now saying that Peter is disgusted by the shallowness of life or something like that. It literally doesn't matter. Then he does it again, and now it's clear he's just fucking with them.
The truth is, he's a drug addict. That's where he's going to right now. That's why he's so nervous. I'm also a drug addict. We rob rich families in their charming vacation homes to support our habit.
George says that he gets it, to which Paul replies,
Hey, Tubby, he's got it. He gets it. That's awesome, really. Really.
in reality, there is nothing to get. As audience members, we expect some method to the madness, a justification for the horrible things we see on screen. Not only does Funny Games take that away from us, it teases us with the possibility and then mocks us for wanting it. It's as if Hanukkah's suggesting that no matter what tragic backstory you come up with to excuse the atrocities taking place, that's all it really is, an excuse. On that note, it's worth mentioning that the villains' names don't even remain consistent. Sometimes it's Paul and Peter, sometimes it's Tom and Jerry, and sometimes it's Beavis and Butthead. It seems Hanukkah is stating that so much as their identities don't actually matter. Now, despite what it seems, you can find out why Paul and Peter are doing this, if you pay attention to their dialogue.
Why are you doing this? Why not?
Why don't you just kill us?
You shouldn't forget the importance of entertainment.
It's boring when mutes suffer. We want to entertain our audience, right? Show them what we can do.
There's a couple more subtle examples, but with just that, it's clear. This family is being tortured for no other reason than to entertain the audience. And as darkly hilarious a concept as that is, it brings me to perhaps the most polarizing aspect of this film, that being the fourth wall, and in larger part, the idea of audience complicity. To make it easy, I'll start with the first fourth wall break in the film, which is about 30 minutes in when Paul is guiding Anne to a not-so-lucky Lucky. She walks out of frame for a short moment, and this happens. Immediately followed by this. Having Paul's acknowledgement of the viewer be directly associated with such an unsettling image is pretty, well, unsettling. It would seem as if Paul is waiting for our reaction to the dead body, or perhaps he recognizes the cliché of the dog dying. For the most part, though, I think it really just serves to let the audience know that Paul is aware of them. It's not until about 10 minutes later that we get our next fourth wall break, and this one just happens to be during an incredibly vital scene.
Okay, we bet, what time is it? 8:40. That in, let's say, 12 hours, all three of you are gonna be kaput. Okay?
What?
You bet that you'll be alive tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and we bet that you'll be dead. Okay?
They don't want to bet.
Well, it's not an option. There has to be a bet. I mean, what do you think? You think they stand a chance? Well, you're on their side, aren't you? Who are you betting on, hmm?
But wait.
Oh boy, where do I start? Well, a good place would be Paul's bet. It's an incredibly bizarre one, if only because of how blatantly unfair it is. How can this bet have any stakes when Paul and Peter have complete control over the end result? Well, the truth is, all movies make this bet after Act 1. They want you to predict whether or not the main characters will survive. Which is a little contradictory considering there can only be one end result that is entirely determined by the filmmaker. You can even liken the antagonist to said filmmaker, as both of them create and control the scenario that endangers the main characters. This bet and Paul's asking our opinion just serves as a representation of the inherently manipulative nature of cinema. Another cool moment is when Paul says,
There has to be a bet.
which you can essentially translate to, there has to be a movie. I'd also like to point out how Paul gives the family 12 hours. If you count each hour as 10 minutes, you get 120 minutes, which is a pretty standard runtime for a film. I know it sounds like a stretch, but trust me, I'll prove you wrong soon enough. Then to top it all off, Paul says,
So what do you want to do now?
I take this line as referring to both the family and the audience, as if to say, the stakes are established and the movie's begun, so what do you want to see next? It's even more clever when you realize that Paul and Peter are essentially running down the checklist of genre expectations. Like, we've already got the dog out of the way, and arguably the phone, and what happens after this is the stripping scene, so that knocks nudity off the list. Oh yeah, there's also the whole final girl trope at the very end of the movie, but that doesn't last too long. It gets even more meta when you dig into some of the dialogue. A little over halfway through the film, Paul asks for the time and then says,
We should think about winning our bet, don't you?
basically meaning that it's time to get to another kill because that's what's expected at this point in the runtime. So that's precisely what happens, but Peter ends up killing the kid by accident, which Paul is less than happy with. Now it might be a stretch, but I think of this as him knowing that people don't like when kids are killed in movies. So at this point, our villains just leave, and the reasoning seems to be,
They're spent.
yet another line you can interpret as being directed at both the Farbers and the viewer. Chances are the audience wants a breather after that big kill, which Paul seems to recognize with "they're spent." So what better way to change it up than to give Anne and George an actual chance? After all, Paul himself says that it can't be a bet if nothing's at stake, as if commenting on the structure of movies and what makes them work. There's also the exchange right after Anne's death.
Why? The deadline was 9, she had almost another hour.
Well, it's too difficult to say out like this. First of all. Second of all, I'm getting kind of hungry.
It's true.
Now, remember the 12-hour bet in its relation to runtimes? Well, the runtime of this film is about 10 minutes shy of 120 minutes, and Paul ends the bet an hour shy of 12 hours. I challenge anyone watching to find a piece of fiction even close to as meta as this, because I don't think it exists. So at this point, you might be starting to understand what I mean by audience complicity. Paul is aware of our general desire to see these characters suffer and operates based on it. You could even make the argument that, by starting the movie, we have essentially invaded these people's lives and initiated the suffering soon to be inflicted upon them. Notice how the mere introduction of the film completely interrupts and overpowers them, as if it too is invading their lives? The seeds are planted right from the get-go, and it wouldn't even be that way had we simply decided not to press play. Anyways, our next fourth wall break comes towards the end of the film.
Do you think it's enough? I mean, you want a real ending, right? With plausible plot development? Don't you?
Really, this just further emphasizes my earlier point. Paul knows that it would make for a pretty unsatisfying ending to kill the remaining Farbers right here and now, so the torture must continue until we reach a proper resolution. And a proper resolution we reach, as no more than 5 minutes later is perhaps the most infamous fourth wall break in cinema history.
Or the slow, drawn out. Look out! Where's the remote control? Where's the fucking remote control? Or the slow, drawn out. You shouldn't have done that, Anne.
This might be the biggest fuck you to an audience I have ever seen. Hanukkah gives you a victory that, by the rules of reality, cannot be taken back. So what does he do? He breaks the rules of reality to take it back, and it feels fucking awful. You're left infuriated, punished by your own naive hope. Of course these people never had a chance. They're not the ones in charge of this story, and neither are you. If Hanukkah decides he wants to delegitimize his own story just to ensure they have no hope, he is completely free to do that. This scene where Paul forces Anne to pray suggests there's a theme of God at play here, and Hanukkah is drawing parallels between the role of a director and, well, God. When it comes to telling your audience that they have no power, this is probably the best way to do it. So at this point, Paul kills the remaining family members and walks up to a brand new house, speaking with one of its residents. With one final look to the camera, it's clear what's about to happen, perhaps representing the never-ending cycle of violence with every new release. Now, when it comes to Hanukkah's message, I don't believe he's trying to say that all violent movies are bad and should never ever be seen by anyone ever. He'd be a little bit of a hypocrite to do so. Rather, I would like to draw your attention to this conversation towards the very end of the film.
But isn't fiction real?
Why?
Well, you can see it in the movie, right?
Of course.
Well, and it's just as real as reality. Because you can see it too. Right?
Bullshit.
Why?
Hanukkah is suggesting that, although fiction exists in an entirely different universe than our own, it is not a barrier between the viewer and the images on screen. For that reason, I believe his issue lies less with the fact that filmmakers will dare to include violence in their films, and more that so many try to spin it into surface-level entertainment. Really, it's a dishonest portrayal, and Hanukkah's a filmmaker all about honesty. In the name of transparency, there's plenty of films that portray violence in a goofy or stylized manner that I very much enjoy. But I'd be lying to say that this movie didn't confront me about it at least a little bit. It's worth mentioning that I probably would not like this movie as much as I do if I didn't think it worked well as a horror thriller. No amount of explaining can properly portray how fucking terrifying Paul and Peter are. And the fact that Michael Pitt and Brady Corbet haven't gotten more recognition for their acting talents is totally beyond me. So if you still hate funny games even after watching my or anyone else's analysis, that is valid, as you've at least tried to understand what it's going for. This film is definitely not for everyone, and if you don't enjoy it, you don't enjoy it. And there's not really much anyone can do to change that. On the other hand, I absolutely love funny games, and if this analysis has helped at least one person understand and possibly even enjoy it more, I would consider this a success. I have no idea how well this video is going to be received, but I thoroughly enjoyed making it. Honestly, part of me feels like I've barely scratched the surface with this fucking thing. If you want to see this movie analyzed even further, I'd recommend checking out this analysis of it. It definitely helped me understand the movie a bit more, and it's just such a great video. So yeah, check out some more of this Michael Dude's movies. They're all very incredible, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.